I live in the present. I'm focused on this week in this game, and each week in every game, like because nothing's promised. Nothing's promised going into next year or anything. So I stay in the moment, stay focused on what I have to do now to even be able to be here next year. And
If you thought the NFL offseason was quiet, think again, because what just came out of Shedeur Sanders' mouth didn't sound like confidence. It sounded like a warning. And the moment those words hit the internet, one franchise in particular felt it in their stomach, the New York Giants. Instantly, this wasn't a routine press conference. This wasn't a young quarterback saying the usual, "We'll see what happens next year." No, this was colder, sharper, almost brutal. A calm, measured speech that quietly admitted something NFL teams never want fans to hear. Nothing is promised. Not next season. Not a starting job. Not loyalty. Not even belief. The internet couldn't believe it, and you won't either. Because the more you listen, the clearer it gets. This wasn't just about football. This was about trust, regret, and front offices realizing, too late, they may have passed on the wrong guy. Fans were already typing. Bro said too much and they're going to regret it. Others said that wasn't speech. That was an indictment. So let me ask you this. If you were in his position, same pressure, same uncertainty, same silence from the people in charge, what would you do? Because once we break this down, piece by piece, trust me, it gets uglier. The moment didn't feel loud. There was no yelling, no table pounding, no viral outburst. That's what made it dangerous. A young quarterback sat at a podium, answered questions calmly, and doing so cracked open reality most NFL teams work overtime to hide. This wasn't rage. This wasn't bitterness. This was acceptance. And acceptance in this league can be more terrifying than anger, because when a player stops begging for reassurance, it usually means he's already understood the truth.
Came through here a couple weeks ago. You mentioned the differences in your situations.
yeah,
And then just a few minutes ago, you said nothing's even promised for next year. Do you still not feel a commitment from the Browns about next year and you being the starter?
nah, I don't think it's about feeling a commitment. I don't think it's about anything of that. It's about controlling what you can control as a person.
Nothing is promised. Not next season. Not loyalty. Not belief. And when those words came out quietly and without drama, the entire tone of the conversation shifted. To the casual viewer, it sounded mature, responsible, even admirable. But to executives, scouts, and front offices who know how the league really works, it sounded like confession, a young quarterback openly admitting he has no assurances about his future, no commitment, no guarantee he'll even be there next year. And when that clip started circulating, when fans replayed it again and again, something else happened behind closed doors. Regret, not loud regret, not public regret. The kind that keeps people awake at night, replaying draft boards and crossed out names. Because this didn't come out of nowhere. This story started long before the press conference, long before the speech, long before the microphones were even turned on. It started with expectations, or rather, the lack of them. Coming into the league, he wasn't supposed to be here. 5th round pick, low risk, developmental. The kind of name teams tell themselves they can afford to miss on because there will always be another one. The kind of player front offices feel comfortable passing on because it doesn't cost them their jobs if he succeeds somewhere else. And that's the first red flag. When a player enters a league with nothing promised, he also enters with nothing to lose. Early on, the signs were subtle. Coaches praised his work ethic, but never too loudly. Teammates talked about his leadership, but always with qualifiers. For a rookie, for his situation, for where he was drafted. Everything about him came with a disclaimer, as if the league was afraid to fully embrace what they were seeing. And while fans debated stats and wins, something else was happening quietly. He was learning, watching, absorbing how quickly praise disappears and how fast narratives flip. Losses piled up, a struggling roster, a leaky offensive line, games where protection collapsed before routes even developed, games where mistakes were magnified because expectations were low and patience was thinner. And yet, week after week, he didn't crack. No excuses, no finger pointing, just accountability. That alone should have set off alarms. Because most young quarterbacks in that position either deflect blame or retreat into silence. He did neither. He spoke carefully, thoughtfully, like someone who already understood the business he was in. Then came the Ravens game, the one everyone points to, the one critics still use as evidence. He didn't play his best. He struggled. He looked overwhelmed early. And for a moment, it felt like the narrative everyone was waiting for had arrived. See, this is why you don't trust late-round quarterbacks. This is why teams hedge. This is why commitment is dangerous. But buried inside that game was something most people missed. A final drive, a stretch where the noise faded, the pressure lifted, and he looked comfortable, confident, like he belonged. That moment mattered more than the box score. He felt it. He said it later. And once a quarterback feels that, it doesn't go away. By the time the press conference arrived, the questions were predictable. Future talk, next season, growth, improvement, the usual softball prompts designed to produce safe, rehearsed answers. And that's where everything changed. Because instead of leaning into optimism, instead of selling hope, he chose honesty. He didn't talk about next year. He talked about now. He didn't sell dreams. He acknowledged reality. Nothing's promised. Not next season. Not a starting job. Not even being there. He said he had to do his part just to earn the right to stay. That sentence landed differently depending on who was listening. Fans heard humility. Analysts heard maturity. But front offices heard something else. Distance. Emotional distance. The sound of a player who already knows the organization hasn't committed, who already understands they're keeping their options open, who already feels the coldness of a league that treats quarterbacks like assets instead of people. And here's the part that hit hardest. When asked directly about commitment, he didn't dodge. He didn't complain. He didn't throw anyone under the bus. He said he doesn't own an organization. He can't dictate what happens. He's not God. That wasn't sarcasm. That was clarity, the kind that usually comes after betrayal, or at least after realizing loyalty is conditional. It was devastating precisely because it was calm. This is where the regret starts to form. Because teams that passed on him weren't just passing on arm talent. They were passing on mindset, on perspective, on a quarterback who already understands pressure, uncertainty, and the reality of being disposable. That understanding hardens players. Sometimes it breaks them, but sometimes it sharpens them into something far more dangerous. Inside draft rooms, decisions are justified with logic. Scheme fit, upside, ceiling, risk. But this speech rewrote the conversation because it exposed something you can't measure at the combine. The ability to stand in front of the world, admit nothing is guaranteed, and still sound unshaken. That's rare. And when something rare slips through your fingers, the realization doesn't come immediately. It comes later, quietly, when you see what you missed. By the end of that press conference, the story was no longer about wins or losses. It was about belief, or the absence of it, about a young quarterback who understands his auditioning every snap, every answer, every moment, and about teams who may soon realize that the calmest voice in the room was also the one telling the most uncomfortable truth. But what came next didn't just deepen the tension. It exposed something far uglier. Beneath the surface, something that would pull in more names, more leaks, and more consequences than anyone expected. That uncomfortable truth didn't stay confined to one press conference. It spread. Clips were chopped, captions were added, tone was debated, but the message stayed the same. Nothing is promised. And once that idea took hold, people started digging. Fans, bloggers, anonymous accounts with too much time and too many sources. Because when a quarterback publicly admits uncertainty about his future, the natural question becomes why. And in the NFL, why almost always leads to what's being discussed behind closed doors. It didn't take long before whispers turned into narratives. Anonymous league insiders began hinting that the front office was monitoring options. Draft analysts quietly floated quarterback-heavy mock drafts. Radio hosts started using phrases like competition insurance and the most dangerous word of all, upgrade. None of it was confirmed. None of it was denied either. And that silence spoke volumes. Because commitment in this league isn't about what teams say publicly. It's about what they don't shut down. Then the leaks started, not official leaks. The kind that surfaced through back channels. Screenshots of alleged internal messages. Unverified, unconfirmed, but believable enough to fuel speculation. One message claimed a scout described him as mentally advanced but still replaceable. Another suggested the organization wanted options on the table going into next season. No names attached, no proof offered, just enough smoke to make people assume there had to be fire. And in the age of social media, assumption is often enough. Fans reacted instantly. Some defended him fiercely, pointing to his composure, his leadership, his growth under pressure. Others echoed the front office narrative, saying it was too early to commit, too risky to put all your eggs in one basket. That split revealed something important. This wasn't just about performance. This was about trust. And trust, once questioned publicly, becomes almost impossible to rebuild privately. As the discourse intensified, another detail resurfaced, one that added fuel to the fire: jersey sales. In a season filled with losses and frustration, his name was still moving merchandise. Top-tier numbers. One of the few bright spots on a struggling roster. That matters more than teams admit, because it means fans are buying into the player even if the organization hasn't. And when that happens, pressure builds. The kind that front offices hate. The kind that forces decisions they'd rather postpone. Meanwhile, commentators started drawing comparisons. Not stylistic comparisons, but situational ones. Quarterbacks who were never fully committed to. Players who were kept on short leashes while management searched for shinier options. The league is full of cautionary tales. Talents wasted, confidence eroded, careers derailed by indecision. And suddenly, this story started sounding familiar. Then came the Giants' angle. Quiet at first. Subtle mentions. Imagine if. What could have been? Analysts revisited draft footage, scouting reports, pre-draft interviews. They talked about how teams talked themselves out of him, how his pedigree worked against him, how expectations created skepticism instead of confidence, and how a franchise desperate for stability might be watching from the outside, realizing they passed on more than just a quarterback. They passed on resilience. Online, the tone shifted from analysis to accusation. Posts went viral suggesting teams were allergic to accountability, that they preferred control over character, that they'd rather draft a blank slate than trust someone who already understands the business. Sarcastic comments flooded timelines. Because nothing screams long-term vision like drafting another project QB and praying. Guess maturity isn't measurable at the combine. The humor stung because it carried truth. Behind the scenes, the pressure cooker intensified. Every press availability became a minefield. Every answer dissected. Every phrase analyzed for hidden meaning. When he talked about controlling what he can control, some heard professionalism. Others heard resignation. When he talked about enjoying the present, critics twisted it into uncertainty about the future. The narrative became elastic, stretched to fit whatever agenda the speaker had. And then came the most damaging rumor of all, that the organization had already begun preliminary discussions with potential quarterback prospects. Again, nothing confirmed, but timing matters. And the timing couldn't have been worse. Because if true, it meant that while he was publicly taking responsibility privately, the organization was hedging, preparing for life without him. And that's where the betrayal narrative took hold. This is the moment when stories like this usually explode, when leaks escalate, when unnamed sources suddenly feel emboldened, when a casual remark turns into a headline. Blogs claim there were heated internal debates, that some coaches wanted stability, while others pushed for change, that the locker room noticed the hesitation, that players talk, that they always know when management isn't fully behind someone. True or not, the idea alone was enough to erode confidence. The irony is that through all this, he never changed his tone. No cryptic tweets. No passive-aggressive comments. No public frustration. Just the same calm demeanor. The same focus on preparation. The same refusal to play the victim. And that consistency made the situation even more uncomfortable because it contrasted sharply with the chaos swirling around him. It made the organization's silence louder. At this point, the story stopped being just about him. It became a mirror held up to the league, a reminder of how quickly narratives flip, how easily commitment is withheld, how often teams chase potential while overlooking proof, and how regret doesn't always show up immediately. Sometimes it creeps in slowly as you watch someone handle adversity with grace while you scramble for answers. Then, just when it felt like the controversy had peaked, another name entered the conversation. Not a player, not a coach, an executive rumored to be pushing hardest for options. A name that sparked debates, conspiracy theories, and late-night radio segments. Some claimed it was about control. Others said it was about ego. No one knew for sure, but the fact that the discussion shifted away from the field and toward the front office said everything. This was no longer just a football story. It was about power, about who gets to decide futures, about how easily trust can be undermined without a single official statement. And as the noise grew louder, one thing became clear. Even if the organization thought it could quietly keep its options open, the damage was already done. The uncertainty was public. The doubt was planted. And once that seed takes root, it changes everything. But just when it seemed like the fallout couldn't get any messier, just when fans thought they'd seen the full scope of the scandal, another twist emerged. One that shifted the narrative from speculation to consequence and forced everyone involved to confront what regret really looks like when it finally comes due. That twist didn't arrive with an announcement. It arrived with silence. The kind of silence that follows when people realize the situation is no longer controllable. No press release, no firm endorsement, no clear denial of the rumors. Just vague answers, careful wording, and a growing sense that the uncertainty everyone felt was no longer imagined. It was real. And once uncertainty becomes reality, the aftermath starts quietly before it turns loud. Inside the locker room, things changed. Not dramatically, not in ways cameras could easily catch, but in small moments. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Players listened more closely to how questions were answered. Veterans noticed how often the future was discussed without names attached. And when a quarterback senses hesitation from the people above him, it doesn't matter how professional he is, it registers. It always does. Trust isn't built on speeches. It's built on clarity. And clarity was nowhere to be found. Outside the building, the reaction turned emotional. Fans who had defended patience began asking harder questions. Why hasn't the organization shut this down? Why does it feel like they're waiting for an excuse? Why does a young quarterback have to publicly accept uncertainty instead of being privately reassured? Those questions flooded comment sections, radio shows, and timelines. And with each unanswered one, the sense of regret grew stronger for teams that had chosen differently. This is where the Giants' narrative truly crystallized. Because while the original regret was hypothetical, the contrast became undeniable. One franchise spiraling without direction at quarterback, another hesitating to commit to someone showing composure under fire. Fans began stitching together timelines, draft decisions, missed opportunities. They replayed footage, quoted old scouting doubts, mocked the logic that kept him sliding on draft boards. Too confident, too much pressure, too much noise. All excuses that suddenly sounded hollow. And then came the most damaging realization of all. If the organization ultimately moves on, it won't be because he failed. It will be because they never fully believed. That distinction matters. Careers survive failure. They don't always survive indifference. Being told you're not good enough is one thing. Being told nothing at all is another. And the speech that started this entire storm suddenly sounded less like maturity and more like preparation. Preparation for separation. Mentally, that kind of environment wears on anyone. Even the most composed players feel it. You start questioning whether effort is enough, whether improvement will be acknowledged, whether you're auditioning for your current team or your next one. And yet, Instead of unraveling, he leaned into control. Control of preparation, control of mindset, control of what he could influence. That approach earned respect. But it also highlighted how alone he was in carrying the weight of the situation. Rumors escalated into hypotheticals, trade scenarios, draft day pivots, free agency whispers. None of it official, all of it destabilizing. Analysts debated his value, as if the story were already over, as if the decision had been made. And that's when regret stopped being theoretical and became emotional, because teams watching this unfold weren't just seeing a quarterback navigate uncertainty. They were seeing what it looks like when composure meets neglect. The pressure finally forced responses, not clear ones, not satisfying ones. Carefully crafted statements about competition, growth, and evaluation. The kind of language designed to keep every option open while committing to nothing. And while those words are standard league practice, in this context they landed like confirmation. Confirmation that the speech was honest, that nothing was promised, that the future was deliberately left undefined. At this stage, the fallout took on a psychological edge. Because once a quarterback understands he may be temporary, he starts playing for something bigger than the current jersey. Legacy, proof, leverage. Every snap becomes evidence. Every mistake magnified. Every success quietly filed away. And that mindset can either break a player or elevate him, watching how calmly he handled it. Many believed it was doing the latter. The final betrayal wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. A lack of reassurance during moments when reassurance would have cost nothing. A refusal to publicly say, "This is our guy." That absence said more than any leak ever could. It told him everything he needed to know. And it told the rest of the league something too, that there may soon be an opportunity created by hesitation. As the season wound down, the narrative solidified, not because of one decision, but because of a pattern of hedging, of silence, of calculated distance. And when that happens, the ending becomes predictable even if the details remain unknown. Either the organization commits late, try to repair trust that's already been strained, or they move on and watch someone else benefit from their caution. That's where regret fully matures. Not in the moment of passing, not in the moment of doubt, but in the aftermath, when you see the full picture. When you realize you didn't just pass on talent, you passed on temperament, on resilience, on someone who understands failure, pressure, and the business without losing himself to it. Those qualities don't show up on scouting reports. They reveal themselves over time. And by the time they're obvious, it's often too late. The final image isn't explosive. It's quiet. A quarterback standing at a podium, speaking calmly about uncertainty, about the present, about controlling what he can control. No bitterness, no anger, just clarity. And that clarity is what lingers, because it exposes the uncomfortable truth at the heart of this story. Sometimes regret isn't caused by making the wrong move. It's caused by being too afraid to make the right one. He didn't vanish. He didn't collapse. He didn't lash out. He kept working. And that might be the most unsettling part for the teams watching, because the secrets didn't disappear with silence. They stayed, in quotes, in clips, in memories. And when the next chapter finally arrives, whether through commitment or separation, one thing is certain. The speech that started it all will be remembered not as a moment of weakness, but as a moment the truth slipped out, quietly, calmly, and without apology. So now the question isn't what he said. It's what the league does next. Because when a quarterback stands in front of the world and calmly admits that nothing is promised, when he says he has no control over whether he'll even be there next year, that's not weakness. That's awareness. And awareness is dangerous in a league built on silence and leverage. Think about it. Shedeur Sanders didn't complain. He didn't beg for validation. He didn't throw his organization under the bus. He accepted reality and kept moving forward. And that should scare front offices more than any bad game ever could. So let me ask you, were the Cleveland Browns wrong for keeping their distance? Or are they about to make a mistake they can't undo? And what about the New York Giants? Sitting there, watching this unfold, knowing they're still searching for answers at quarterback. Are they already feeling that regret creeping? Or are they about to repeat the same cycle all over again? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Talent gets drafted every year. Arm strength gets evaluated every combine. But mentality like this, you don't find it often. And when you do, you either recognize it or you explain later why you missed it. This story isn't over. Not even close. The decisions haven't been announced yet, but the tension is already written all over the league. And when the next move finally happens, commitment or separation, you're going to remember this moment, this speech, this silence. So drop your thoughts in the comments. Are teams making a massive mistake by not committing? If he becomes available, who should move first? And do you think the Giants are already sick about how this is playing out? Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay locked in, because when the next chapter breaks, we'll be right here breaking it down.